So welcome back to the O'Galley Scenic Railway. I'm standing on our main line up on the high hill, and behind me is the big cut. You saw the footage where we laid track through that big cut, and now we've got an area that of tangent track between the big cut and our horseshoe behind the camera. So we're going to show you our rail laying day and how we made it about halfway through that area. The next time we lay track, we will be completing the rest of that horseshoe, and then we'll be back on another tangent section. So sit back and enjoy, and we will be seeing you at the end. Well, here we are. It's another Tuesday. Beautiful summer morning, sometime around 7:30 or so, and we're getting ready to lay another stretch of track. This stretch of track is just west of the big cut that we've talked about before. It's a tangent section, probably 250 feet or more long, and as we did in the cut, we had everything prepped. We had the ballast down, we had our fabric down, and then we had our ties down and spaced, and then we had our first row of spikes put in, which really saves us an awful lot of time once we get the big crew there. They don't have to mess around with lining up that first row, and really makes track laying go a lot faster. We've said a lot of this before, but I thought we'd kind of go over some of it again. And you're seeing track laying from a slightly different angle. And we'll just kind of watch what happens here. So we have the guide rail, which is the first rail that you lay down, is on the right side of the track from where the camera is. And as we come up to this curve, there's a curve in the horseshoe that starts just behind the camera and to the right. Right before we get there, we have to transition from the outside guide rail to an inside guide rail, which is inside the curve. So we're switching rails. And so we're going to be showing a little bit of that in the footage coming up here. I probably have mentioned this before, but when you pull rail into a corner, you always want to pull the rail closest to the inside of the corner first, and then you pull the outside rail over to it, because otherwise you have to attempt to stuff the rail into an arc, which is very difficult to do. It's easier to bend it around the corner. So in the big cut, which is off in the distance on the other side of the rail train that's sitting there, that was a section that had the guide rail on the left side. So we're going to have to switch to the right side here. And we're getting up to that point. I think the section we're working on now is the last straight section of that tangent stretch. And so the first spike goes on the opposite side. We have a slightly smaller crew this week, but it turns out that we actually laid more track. The track on this day was about 320 feet, we figure. And the last section we did in the big cut in that curve was 320 feet. So we did a little bit better. We're getting a little faster with fewer people. Everybody at this point, 2 years into it, they all kind of know what they're doing. So there's not a lot of training that has to happen. Everybody just kind of does what they know they have to do. So right now they're gauging and spiking down the gauge rail on the tangent stretch, and then after that we'll be moving on to the next section here. So we start usually around 7:30 in the morning by the time the crew gets there on a track laying day. And we usually wrap up around 11:30. So we do our 320 feet in that short amount of time. So now we're transitioning over to a new guide rail. So the guide rail is now on the upper part of the screen. I'll flip around and show you. So that track that's on the right side, that rail that's on the right side, is the new guide rail. The track on the left was the old guide rail. And then we'll probably lay two 40-foot sections of rail just to get us started into that curve. And then we'll come back and continue the curve with the gauge rail. That way it makes it much easier to line everything up, get the curve the way you want it. You can poke it and prod it and drag it around if you need to correct any flaws in the way you've laid out that first rail before you go in with the second rail, because like I've said before, once you get the second rail in and spike down, there's no more adjustments that you can do other than very small amounts of pulling and tugging on it, but you can't do any major adjustments. So it kind of works out pretty good to do at least two rails before you get the second one in. And that guide rail, as you pull it, you're pulling against the first spike, which you can see there on the right side. And it pulls the rail into the curve. It also pulls all the ties into automatic alignment with very little adjustment that you have to do. So everything's pretty much ready for that second spike. You will get ties that'll twist around and misbehave and try to move around. You go around and correct that, and then hold those ties straight when you put the second spike in. That way, when you go to do the second rail, the ties are locked in place. They don't move around, and all you got to do is put your gauges in, put your clamps in, pull the second rail in. And we don't show it here, but we usually use either a side-by-side or a four-wheeler with a winch on it to pull both the guide rail and the gauge rail into place and hold it there. It works very well. And we're adjusting some misbehaving ties that don't want to cooperate, and then they'll just keep working right down the line onto our next rail. So when we're really kind of cooking on this rail laying, we can do a 40-foot stick and then the rail on the other side and pull them together, and we can do it in 20 minutes or 25 minutes. It doesn't take that long. People think about laying railroad track with 40-pound rail, which is obviously pretty small, as a really big, hard, difficult project. It's not as hard as you think it is, especially when you got a good crew. And once you get your technique down, it goes a lot faster, just like anything else. So as I said before, at the end of this day we got about a third of the way into that horseshoe, which is behind the camera. We're going to show that in an upcoming video here. Again, 360 feet of track. And we'll show you how we pull that around the rest of that horseshoe. Try to get some different angles. We might even have some drone footage when we do that. Well, this is just a little taste of one of our track laying days. Kind of talk a little bit more about how we do things, and we'll be doing it again next week. So we hope you enjoyed this video showing us laying track again on the new horseshoe just west of the big cut down there that we've showed you before. So if you like our content, please smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.